This is a work session of the Anchorage Assembly. Today is the 17th of October. It's 1:22. We're scheduled from 1:20 to 1:40, I believe. This is a discussion about emergency ordinance proposed 2024-2, an emergency ordinance to the municipality of Anchorage providing additional financial resources for capital expenditures required to continue to address and repair critical damage to the municipal infrastructure caused by the 2018 Point McKenzie earthquake. We'll do introductions, starting with Mr. Littlefield.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Christopher Constant.
Anna Brawley.
On the phone, we have Mr. Johnson.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Myers.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone? Hearing none, that's enough. Mr. Falsey, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The chair requested this work session so that we could talk through any questions on this emergency ordinance 2024-2. I'll say as a high level summary, it is a cleanup measure to true up the 2018 earthquake recovery budgets because the original estimates proved low. For general government, in the fund that we are addressing here, which for those who want to play in SAP is 231,801, originally the budget was for $15 million. Because the projects took longer than were anticipated or had changes in scope, there are already actuals for those projects posted in the amount of $20 million, and those projects are not all the way done. It is also an accounting measure because it moves fire station costs in a manner that we need to close period 14 in 2023, which is an important piece of the puzzle for how we get our overall finances on track. And it is an emergency ordinance because it relates back to the original emergency ordinances from all the way back in 2018 and 2019 to true up those original numbers and to preserve any ability to collect costs through the tax cap that we are not able to recover through FEMA, although we don't anticipate that as a result of this measure or anything else, that the ultimate amount of FEMA recovery is going to change. I will say, as the new administration have entered into office, this is a bit of a head scratcher as to why this didn't happen a lot earlier. If you go into SAP and were to pull up this fund, you will see the actual expenditures exceed the budget and by a fairly significant amount. There are reasons why that can happen, but there are also that should have triggered going back to the assembly probably a little bit earlier. All of that is to say, this is happening largely as anticipated when after the earthquake, there were a lot of things that broke, fire stations, facilities in Chugach Eagle River, various road projects, and the instruction and the approval from the assembly at the time was go forth and fix all of those things. That means we're going to eat into the cash pool. And then we'll attempt to seek FEMA recovery. That is still exactly what is happening now. It's just that the actual budgetary authority to go eat into the cash pool was less than we actually ended up needing. This hopefully trues us all up and gets us to the goal line on the general government side.
So I think I'm going to put Mr. Gates on the spot. Dean, I'm going to put you on the spot. So can you describe to the new members or members who have only been through this once at the beginning of this year, the nature of an emergency ordinance, how it works, kind of what the process is?
Sure. And I would first start by distinguishing an emergency ordinance from an emergency meeting. They're two different things, but sometimes people confuse them and think that an emergency ordinance is at an emergency meeting. Anyway, an emergency ordinance is provided for in our charter. I think it's 10.03. And it simply says that in an emergency, according to the definition that's in our charter, which is unforeseen circumstance or conditions that might threaten life or safety, and that's paraphrasing, it can be introduced and passed at the same meeting rather than the usual process required for ordinances in our charter, which is introduction and at least a 7 days notice for a public hearing, holding a public hearing, and then action. So emergency ordinances, because they're so urgent, and then the definition of emergency can be introduced and passed at the same meeting without a public hearing. Now we've had a couple where the assembly asked, can we have a public hearing anyways? And nothing prevents that, so we could open for a public hearing. I would say that with this much notice, it's not really public. If you haven't given notice that there's a public hearing this Tuesday, so that's not really a possibility, but I'm just noting that assembly could. And maybe that's a question to give the administration. Is there like an issue of timing if this is postponed for that purpose, or if it's postponed to the next meeting for passage or action? And I don't know the answers to those. They've obviously, from what Mr. Foster said, has some urgency to get this done and wrapped up. And then the other thing about an emergency ordinance is if it's for funding or the costs needed to satisfy the emergency ordinance, they're above the tax cap. So there are additional funds collected by tax levy over the tax cap. And I think those are the salient points that you're asking for, Mr. Sharon.
Thank you. So anything to add before we have any discussion with the members?
No, I think well, maybe a little bit. I'll just say for additional color, I agree with everything that Assembly Council Gate had said. There's a little bit of a historical accretion that happened that gets us to this posture. In 1975, when we have a first charter, the emergency ordinance is a mechanism to act very quickly. Something has happened and you just can't wait for 7 days. And so that was the emergency ordinance we had in the charter. When the tax cap got written in 1983 as a citizens initiative, it said emergency ordinances the cost of them can be collected above the cap. And so that sort of married you have to go real fast to you have some extraordinary costs that you couldn't have budgeted for, and puts us in this sort of funny needing to use the old machine to activate the new machine. Here, I will say though, Assembly Council Gate is correct. You don't have to have a public hearing on this ordinance, but there's no reason why you couldn't have a public hearing on this ordinance. We will say that because this one is a critical piece of letting us close the books in 2023, we would really prefer action happen on the 22nd. If you wanted to open a public hearing at that meeting, there's no reason why you couldn't, but we really would like this to pass as soon as it practically can.
And I think the clerk might argue, no, we can't schedule a public hearing at this point for the meeting on Tuesday because the time window has closed. And so you can't just say we're having a public hearing. It has to be an actual public hearing, which means the item has to be introduced and set. And so that's okay though. Like we can take action. I think do members have any input, thoughts, questions? So I think what's going to be really essential to communicate. Oh, you did, Mark. Sorry. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. I'm sure we have, and I'm just making sure that it's there. Have we done the back end with the state and FEMA for FEMA reimbursement, or is this out of our pocket?
We are actively doing the work with the state and FEMA, and we are not expecting that this is going to result in a net additional out of our pocket cost. Some of it's reasonable to say this earthquake happened in 2018. What is going on? Part of it is that the projects that were responsible for that earthquake still haven't all closed, and that means that process with FEMA and the state is ongoing.
Okay, thank you very much.
So go ahead, Ms. Burley.
I just want to briefly restate and make sure that I'm tracking. So not all of the backstory. I appreciate this lays it out pretty well. So essentially we need to access funds that would otherwise not be available because of our requirement to maintain certain balances in order for us to finish these projects as soon as possible, with the idea that we will get paid back, but we have to front load the money. Is that right?
Yes.
Because these are FEMA reimbursed projects.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
The question I think you're going to have a hard time, or maybe not a hard time, but it's going to be the crux of the situation will be on Tuesday. Please help define why this is an emergency. So I think that's really where we need to spend a little bit of time, because I think that's where members who might find opposition to this will get it. And so I think we need to have some info on that. Maybe we don't need it today. Maybe you can theme that out today, but practically speaking, I think that that's going to be a very important part of the discussion on Tuesday, is what makes this that.
Yes, and to the chair, I think there's two ways to answer that. One is that this is really relating back to the original emergency and effectively truing up the numbers that were in the prior emergency ordinances, so that we're we're really pointing to that moment as the emergency and then fixing the numbers that were sent to the assembly at that time. In addition, it is still true that absent additional assembly budget authorization, then we'd have an insufficiency of budget to continue to make forward progress on correcting all of the repairs that happened as a result of 2018. And that too, I think, meets the definition of the charter.
Okay, so, and that's fine for me, and I'm satisfied. I think though that's the challenge for you on Tuesday. Okay, anyone else? Anyone on the phone? Okay, it's nice and tidy. Had a chance to brief us, which is good. I think if there's nothing else, we will call this done and see everyone on Tuesday. We're adjourned.